Hey everyone, it's Alex here, and thanks for tuning in for another episode of Virtual Chats. And today on the show, we're pleased to welcome Lee Harrison of Monstrosity. So, Lee, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to chat with me. And I have to say, a very underrated drummer in death metal and metal as a whole. So, a real pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, buddy.
All right. So, are you down in Florida?
Yeah, Tampa.
Yeah, Tampa. How's the weather down there?
That's great right now. Sun's out. It's I wouldn't say it's hot, but it's warm, you know.
Kind of envious right now because I'm up in Toronto and it's snowing right now. Yeah.
Actually, I haven't been out today, so it might be a little chilly, but it wouldn't be nothing, nothing bad.
Yeah,
Maybe 70, something like that.
around there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I guess the first thing we should dive into as well is, Monstrosity has the new record coming out, Screams from Beneath the Surface, and I had the chance to hear the whole thing, and it's a phenomenal album. It's got the blend of the brutality and mixed with like melody, tempo changes, and it's not just like all a full assault all the way through. It's very varied, which is something that I really love as a listener. For this album, you worked with Jason Sukoff, and it was produced so many killer albums over the years, including many of my favorites. Talk about your experience of making this record and working with Jason, because I know he can be like he's an absolute riot and a goofball, which makes working with him really fun.
Yeah. Um, we worked with him kind of before he did anything. Like I'd met him when on the Millennium Tour when he lived in Connecticut,
Hmm.
and he hung outside the bus, and we just talked a lot of the for several hours. I remember hanging out. That's when I first met him, and then when he moved to Florida, he lives just above Orlando, and he came out to Tampa for some shows, and he was telling me that he's getting his studio going and this and that. And then one of the other times he came, he played me the Caffernome project that he did. Um, and at the time, we had done all of our albums at Morrisound, and it's a little bit stressful because you're under the clock. You're paying by the hour, so to speak. I mean, you're doing a block out for the day, but it's still kind of stressful because you're conscious of the clock. And one good thing about working like that is you get a lot accomplished quicker, but it's a lot more stressful at the same time, just because that there's a pressure there to get it done, and you're worried about the money and trying to get everything done, of course. um, so we were kind of looking for a new avenue to maybe cut down some of the budget. And when we heard that Caffernome album, it was like, oh wow, he can get that killer production and maybe do it a little cheaper. So we did the Rise to Power album with Jason back in 2002, three, somewhere around there. And then we ended up going back to Morrisound. I think with that time, it was just easier because of Tampa, being in Tampa and stuff. And then of course we did Passage of Existence, and just kind of since Rise to Power, Jason kind of had a career doing the triviums and doing like more of that kind of stuff. And he evolved as a producer. And the way that he works with me, I don't know about everybody else, but the way he works with me is that basically we come up, it's, I tell him how many songs we're going to record, and then he'll give me a price for that.
Right.
And then, so if it takes, 3 days, cool. If it takes 10 days, cool. It doesn't matter. And so it's not as stressful. And I'm not worried about, we'll cut a song and go watch Sopranos, and chill out and not, and then, once we get a little inspired, and then we go out and work some more, where it's easier on him and it's easier on me, as being a drummer, because obviously, trying to play drums, this crazy drumming, and trying to do it all in one day, and you're physically it's tough. And um like I said, there's a way, because it drags out obviously longer. But at the same time, like Jason, we'll go into, I call him a tuning hole, where we'll end up spending 2 hours on some little squeak that only he hears,
Yeah,
or like we'll, tuning a snare drum, we'll change the head like 3 times,
yeah,
just trying to find, whereas at Morrisound, we would never be able to afford to do that, you know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
So, and in the end result speaks for itself, of course, like Passage and, the new album, whatever, they both, the drums, I'm happy with the drum sound. So,
yeah,
the end result is what matters, so in that respect, that's why we went to Jason. And he wanted to record the bass guitar too. He's like, just have him come over and we'll do it, because the main thing at this point of technology and kind of the modern ways, we need a drum room, because it's hard to record 16 to 20 channels with that pristine sound.
yeah,
But it's easy to record one track, like a guitar track or a bass track or a vocal, that we can manage on our own. We don't necessarily need the $1 million studio to do those kind of things.
yeah,
So, however, saying that, so with the bass, Jason's like, just have him come over. I'll work, we'll work it out. Don't worry about it. It's just easier to record, the simple things like the vocals and the guitars and stuff. So that was kind of how we were planning on doing this record, was just, the main thing, doing the drums in a real studio, and kind of how we did the last album, where we did guitars and bass at a home studio, so to speak. And then the vocals we ended up doing over at Obituary's studio at their house, John Tardy's house.
yep,
So it's still technically a home studio.
yep,
Um, he was just set up for it, and it made sense at the time. Um, Whereas this time, I had done, I don't know if people know, or maybe they do, maybe they don't, but from 2007 to 2009, I worked with former Crimson Glory vocalist Midnight before he passed away. Recorded a bunch of his stuff, and I've been releasing it ever since. We released a 3-song CD in 2014, and just recently we did a covers album that was from when he was alive,
yeah,
and it was so the long and short of it is, I was in Morrisound doing the mastering for that album, and I was working with Jim Morris, and it just kind of gave me the idea to maybe bring Monstrosity back to Morrisound,
yeah,
and you know number one, to kind of like go the extra mile, and instead of just doing it at home, to push ourselves to go into Morrisound and use a real studio. I love Jim Morris. He did our first album, and I've known him ever since. And the guy's just a genius. I can't say enough good things about Jim. And so it's just always fun working with him. Mark Prater, who he was actually the assistant on Imperial Doom. He did some engineering at Morrisound for this album. So, it's just cool to kind of go full circle, and they're local in Tampa, so we don't have to go all the way to Sanford to do some. Makes it a little easier when it's just right across town,
yeah,
rather than having to go 2 hours to do stuff. And plus it gives something to talk about in the interviews. People love to hear about Morrisound and the stories,
yeah.
and it looks good on the album. Morrisound having the name on the album, so.
Exactly. And
Um,
yeah, more sound with like the all the albums that were made there from the early years of death
for
metal,
sure.
outside of death metal. But what when you think about it, more sound is like to death metal, like very much like Electric Lady Studios, or those legendary studios that
Sure.
the great records over the years.
Yeah. Especially in the early days. I mean, just they had stepped up the drum sound from compared to what was going on at the time. Like, uh, and we were just fortunate that it was right here in our backyard.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, because I love how you were talking about it, how you have the more modern element of studios with like working with Jason, but then you also have a bit of like the nod to the history with Morrisound, and having Jim Morris, being involved in that. So it's great that you have like the both sides for a
For
record.
sure.
Yeah, being for you being known as I know you're the primary songwriter in Monstrosity. How do you handle the songwriting being a drummer? Do you also play guitar, or do you have another
Yeah,
writing the song?
yeah. I toured with Obituary. I did guitar in a South American tour back in 2012.
Okay,
I played with Pete Sandoval and Terrorizer. I played guitar
nice.
from 2013 to 2020. That Midnight project I told you about, like in that project, I was some songs I would be the whole band. You know, I'd be playing keyboards and I'd be playing, uh, various exotic instruments. Or doing different stuff. So it was, bass. I played bass in cover bands before, so I've done kind of done it all. Actually, um, playing bass in a cover band actually like kind of enlightened me for for writing the songs in Monstrosity and the bass parts, and having the bass not just be the unison of the guitar, having it actually play its own part with the in syncopation with the drums. So
Mm,
like on a song like Banished to the Skies from the new album, where it's like those verse parts where it's like stopping, and there's the space where the bass is not just playing the whole time, like things like that. By playing bass in a cover band, it gave me that window to like actually learn how to play bass and to approach the bass in a different aspect.
nice. Yeah, because it's not something you hear normally about, like, the drummer being like the main songwriter. Like I'm a drummer myself too, and but I can't play guitar, but I do love writing songs.
It was kind of out of necessity when I was a kid. I was like 16, 17, and where I was living, we were kind of on the west coast of Florida, just about an hour and a half south of Tampa. Back then there was no internet, there was none of that, and there just weren't people into playing metal where I was at, and I just didn't have anybody to play with, so I just kind of took it upon myself to start writing songs and create recordings. Basically, I would record a drum track into a cassette tape, put that into my stereo, and use that same recorder to record myself playing along with what I had on the stereo. So, like, basically, like a 2 track instead of
Yeah,
a 4 track. It was just like a bootleg version of a 2 track.
yeah,
And I would, make recordings like that, and try to like come up with song ideas. Like I've been wanting to do this since I was 7 years old. Like this has been my goal, you know, to play music and to write songs and to do this, and so I've always been focused on that, and my mind's been kind of revolved around that. So like I remember driving around, with my family and thinking, oh, if I record this and add that, and just keep recording. I didn't realize that there would be issues with the sound,
yeah.
getting, the room sound getting louder and louder and creating, noise or whatever. But as a kid, it just, I've always been focused on trying to do that, and trying to like more or less just jam. I've been forced to jam with myself at times. In 1990, after I left Malevolent Creation, I had like a year between Malevolent and Monstrosity, and I did like a 9-song demo album, whatever. It wasn't an album because it was just on a 4 track, but I wrote 9 songs, and a lot of those Imperial Doom songs, what we did is we would pluck riffs from that demo, and like, okay, I got a riff, and then Mark Van Erp would come at me with his riff, and we'd combine them, and so we would kind of pluck the best riffs from. That project was called Submission, and we would pluck riffs from the Submission demo, and create new songs out of those. So I've always, when all else fails, I do it myself. Like my Lavoisian I have a rock project called Lavoisian where I play all the instruments and sing. That one's more focused on my vocals. Like I'm trying to, I'm more concerned with the vocals, and not really like trying to show off on the music necessarily.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's, a good thing to, like I can work on leads and work on my guitar playing and stuff too. Um, but a lot of times when there's downtime from Monstrosity, I work on that project. So when you see Lavoisian, it's usually because Monstrosity's doing something else, or there's a break of some sort.
Yeah, man. You're a man of many talents, so that's great.
Yeah.
Speaking of, you brought up Mark Van Erp. This is also the first album since Imperial Doom to feature Mark. How
Yeah.
did he end up coming back to the band? I know he did some touring with you guys, and then he became like fully
Right.
united to the band. Like, talk
Uh,
about him coming back.
sure. He actually wrote a lot on the second album.
Yeah.
So he's got a little bit of a presence there, even though he didn't play the bass parts. He did write, Manic. Uh, he was there for, Dream Messiah and some of the Manipulation Strain. Those are kind of songs that he was involved with. Um, but yeah, we've always kept in touch throughout the years. We've always been friends. He actually went out with us in what year was that? That was probably like 2001. We did a tour, and he just went along as a friend, kind of. He would do some of the driving, and he would help us out with the gear, and so we've always remained friends. And then 2010, we played in Mexico City. He did that show. Um, he did 70,000 tons of metal with us once, and then our bass player Mike Pagioni, the one we had been playing with, he ended up moving to the Ukraine to be with his girlfriend, and we would we'd go to Europe, and he was right there, so that made sense. Like he could just pop over from Ukraine to wherever we started the tour, play the tour, and then go home. Um, we would have some off shows in the U.S. We did like California Death Fest, where like it just didn't make sense to fly Mike Pagioni all the way over from the Ukraine just to play one show.
Yeah.
So we brought Mark in on that, and there was some couple other things like that where we brought Mark in, and it's just comfortable with Mark. He's a brother from way back. I love his bass playing. Um, he's excited about it. He feels. I think he feels he missed out on a lot of stuff that he could have done, and so it's just good for him. That I know he enjoys it, and it makes it fun for us when somebody's that excited about it. And not to say there's no hard feelings with Mike Pagioni. He's actually back in the U.S. now, the last couple of years, but we may work together in the future. There's no written rule of anything of what's going on at this point. We kind of shuffle members around and do different things depending on people's schedules and depending on what's going on. I think people come to expect that as long as I'm there, they know that they're going to get a good quality prod. I'm not playing with a bunch of hacks. I tend to I'm lucky in the respect that I have good musicians kind of gravitate around me.
Yeah.
And we'll see. Right now things are going good with this lineup, and we're just kind of pushing that. Um, just to continue on, we have the last few tours we used Justin Walker, who was kind of a younger guy. He was actually born the month that the band formed, which is funny. Like to as long as he's been alive is when we started the band. That's kind
Yeah.
of fun. He plays in a reggae rock band, doing other kind of music. He tours, like they're pretty big. They do some pretty big places, and he stays pretty busy with that. So we kind of juggle the schedules between that, and now we've been bringing Sam Molina, who played on the Rise to Power album. I played with him, and I brought him into the Terrorizer project with Pete Sandoval. He played bass and vocals on that. He's a guitar player by trade. That's what he's mainly enjoys doing, and he's able to do that. So we've been using Sam lately for some of the live shows, and that's our plan for this next European tour is to use Sam. But basically, we've been juggling kind of back and forth between Justin and Sam, depending on scheduling and who's available and what's going on. So for this album, even though Justin played some phenomenal stuff on the record, um, we just felt it probably more important to just promote the album as a 4-piece rather than putting his picture in there. And maybe he'll be on the next album, maybe he won't. Instead of confusing the issue, just keep the lineup, the core four guys: Mark, me, and Ed, and Matt, and just figure out the fifth member kind of later is kind of the thinking. Like we'll see how it evolves and what happens with as time goes on. But I love all these guys. There's no hard feelings between anybody. It's really just a matter of, scheduling and what everybody else has got going on in their lives.
Yeah, scheduling can be like a bit of a pain in the ass, a lot,
Right.
especially with like, when everyone's got multiple projects going on
And
or
families and whatnot,
families or jobs or anything.
jobs,
So yeah, so yeah,
so
like going down the whole hired hand kind of route would be like the best call for right now until you can like
for
get to the
sure.
point where it's like find like the
Yeah,
right guy for the full-time thing.
right.
Um, I wanted to something like popped into my mind. This is something that I heard like a while back and it stuck with me. Um, I heard on the Cannibal Corpse documentary, Centuries of Torment, um, George ended up calling you Lee Lavender. Is that your like nickname or something?
That was from the old Malevolent Creation days.
Uh,
Brett Hoffman, the original singer, or the original singer for Malevolent. Every day we'd come into practice and he'd like have a new, like, what do you call me? Lictitious Lee. He'd have a new L word that would go with my name.
yeah,
And one day Lavender Lee came out and it just kind of stuck. And the Malevolent guys in general, they would call me Lavender. And, you know, kind of back in the day, everybody had it like Mark Van Erp, his nickname's Crony.
mhm,
George's name was Grinder, of course. Um, Everybody kind of had a nickname. That was just kind of how we did things back then. And
yeah.
so, yeah,
And as everyone knows that you're the one who gave him the name Corpse Grinder.
right. Yeah. He was in a band called Corpse Grinder, and that's just kind of how we referred to him. Like when he first came, yeah, we'll get this Corpse Grinder guy. Well, Corpse Grinder. We'll get Corpse Grinder down here.
Yeah,
And then at the time too, it was kind of when like Bathory had Corthon. Obviously that's not the guy's real name. But like, or you'd have somebody named Destroyer in a band. Or whatever. There would be these different kind of things. So when we did the demo, we just thought it would be cool. We'll call him Corpse Grinder. That's his name. And
yeah,
I made sure to like, no, there's no George Fisher, nothing. It's
yeah,
Corpse Grinder.
yeah. The rest
So
is history.
yeah,
Well, everybody watching it, if you aren't aware, now you're aware. This man right here is
yeah,
responsible for the name Corpse Grinder.
exactly.
And it's stuck because everyone just ends up calling him Corpse Grinder. You don't really hear a lot of people calling him George, right? Some
Right,
people do. I do still do, but it's just one of those things. And stage names and nicknames were like the main thing for like the metal scene back in the day. You had like Angel Ripper, Witch Hunter,
for
uh,
sure.
Chronos, Abaddon, Mantis, all that kind of stuff.
It's funny. I have a friend. His name's Dale, but he actually worked at a cemetery digging graves. So we called him Grave Digger. That was like we had that nickname for him way back then. And it
There you
was funny. George was staying at my mom's house. He was staying with me at my mom's. This was like 1991, and Digger called for George, and so my mom picks up the phone. He's like, "Yeah, is Corpse Grinder there?" She's like, "Yeah, who's this?" He's a Grave Digger. It's like it's so weird and funny, but it's a true story. That's a totally true story. My mom's like, "What?" Like,
Yep. Like anytime like any of us would do that, like, and our moms would like get on in between that, and they'll go like, "What are you guys doing?"
yeah,
But we love our moms, despite of like what the kind of craziness they think we do.
right.
So you mentioned you got a European tour coming up. When is it, and what are the other touring plans for this record coming up?
Well, there's kind of a long story there. I'll try to make it brief. With the previous album, like Millennium, the album came out in '96. We didn't get to Europe until the end of '98, so there was like a 2 year gap. Same, with Endure Purity, the album came out, and we were just in Europe for the Millennium cycle, so it was like it was too soon to go right back to Europe again. So
Mhm.
it ended up being like another 2 years before we got back to Europe.
Yeah.
So that kind of kept happening, with the band, where we wouldn't get to Europe right away. So
Mhm.
with Passage, I purposely took the band, like in 2010. The idea was to take the band off the road and kind of go away for a while, finish the writing, recording the album, come back with the new album, and tour right away with the new album. Unfortunately, the singer at the time, Mike Robachek, he had some other things going on, and it didn't work out like that. We ended up kind of, probably should have should have stayed on the road that during that whole period, but the idea was to come back with kind of more of a bang. Unfortunately, it didn't work, and it ended up being like 8 months in between the time that we released the album and got to Europe. This album, finally, the plan, finally everybody's ready to tour and willing, and so the album comes out March 13th. The tour starts April 18th, so it's about a month, which is still a fair enough time. So the idea is that we're finally going to get a tour with the album, when the album is still hot, it's fresh for the people's ears, it's kind of something new for the people to experience. And so we're looking forward to that. The idea is to kind of keep the ball rolling this time and not like go away, and who knows, lineup changes and things happen, and sometimes that derails things, and I can't foresee the future, who knows, so but at this point the idea is to kind of keep things going. We're in talks for a US tour, and that's looking like it may be kind of end of summer for that. We're going to Brutal Assault in Czech Republic. We're playing that festival.
Yep.
Doing the Maryland Death Fest pre-fest show with Napalm Death and Sinister and Repulsion. That's in kind of right after the tour, the European tour. We come back and do that. There was talk about doing the Milwaukee Metal Fest thing, but that didn't work out. Yeah, so like the plan is to do a US tour in the fall. So hopefully, like I said, the plan is to keep the ball rolling. I know that Metal Blade has some plans for some reissues here and there and some other things going on. And we're already working on ideas for the next album. No promises, of course, because it never works out the way you want. But, we're pushing for, to get, to not take 8 years or 11 years. We want 4 years seems to be the kind of normal for like the early days. Imperial to Millennium was 4 years. Millennium to Dark Purity was 4 years. Yep. That's kind of how it is.
Yeah, for sure. And hopefully, when you do the US tour, hopefully it can include a stop up here in Toronto, some Canadian dates.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Have you guys ever played up here?
Yeah, we did. Let's see, we did it in '96. We did a show in Montreal.
Okay.
And then in '99, we did the Dimmu Borgir tour, and we played in I don't remember the name of the cathedral. No, I can't remember. It was right there on Queen Street somewhere.
Oh, okay. Opera House?
I don't think so. I think it was another Reverb, maybe, or
Reverb. Yeah.
Reverb. That one. Okay.
Yeah.
We did that. We did Montreal on that tour too, and then later on with Deeds of Flesh, we did all that. We went up to Rimouski and went kind of like way, east.
Nice.
So we have done it. We never done Vancouver. That would be something interesting to do, I think.
Yeah, for sure. So everybody watching on the West Coast in Vancouver, you want Monstrosity, talk to your promoters out there, just like we all. Well, Lee, I just want to say thank you so much. It's been a fantastic chat, and the new album once again is fucking phenomenal, and I look forward to picking it up and hopefully seeing you guys if you guys can come up here.
Hell yeah, brother! Thank you, man.
All right, thank you, man. All the best.
Soon.
Talk to you soon. Okay.